Welcome back to this second session, easy for you to say, expanding your practice, writing beyond the book. So obviously being a writer, being a novelist or being any type of literary writer doesn't pay the bills. There are practically no writers that live entirely off their books. So the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges, is kind of making ends meet and kind of juggling your writing with your other work. Forgive me if I use this horrible phrase, portfolio career, a lot today. So today we're delighted to welcome three novelists. We have Laura Barnett, who's an author, journalist, teacher of creative writing. She's written regularly for The Guardian, The Observer, The Daily Telegraph and Time Out London. As well as novels, she also writes short stories, and she's a lecturer here at Manchester Metropolitan University. She teaches for the Curtis Brown Creative, and she's a Royal Literary Fund Fellow. She is also a mentor for Arts Emergency and the Writers' Development Agency Spread the Word. At the end, we have Rowan Hisayo Buchanan. Rowan is the author of Harmless Like You, Starling Days, The Sleep Watcher. She is also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. She won the Authors Club First Novel Award and the Betty Trask Award, and the Costa was shortlisted for the Costa Novel Award. She is the editor of the Go Home anthology and Dog Hearted. She's received residencies and fellowships from the likes of the Macdonald Colony, the Gladstone Library, and other places. And then in the middle, we have Ellie Goldstone. Ellie is a graduate of the City University Creative Writing MA. She's a former prose editor of Cadaverine. And she's the author of Strange Heartbeating, which also won a Betty Trask Award. I thought I'd start by just asking each of our guests today just to talk a little bit about, introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their career and how they kind of master this juggling act of being a writer and also paying the bills. So we'll start with you, Laura.
Okay. Thank you, Rowan. So I'm Laura Barnett. Laura Barton is an awesome writer that I actually used to work with at The Guardian. So just just to clarify that, it is confusing having two Laura Bar something kind of in this world. But just in case anyone's a fan of her, I didn't want to steal her thunder because she's a brilliant writer. But yeah, so I'm Laura Barnett, and I've published 4 novels so far, probably the best known being my debut, The Versions of Us, which was published in 2015. And that's a novel that tells 3 versions of one couple's life together across 60 years in 3 different ways. I'm going to try and keep this quite brief, but so I was a journalist before that. So that novel was published when I had just turned 30, and I'd graduated at 21, as many of us do, and I'd spent then about 10 years working as a journalist, even though I knew that all I really wanted to do ultimately was write fiction. But I felt at 21, well, there were many reasons why I needed to go and make a living, and I wasn't sure I was really confident enough or I knew enough yet about the world. I mean, I still feel that now at 41, but at 21, I was convinced I needed to have a sort of extra career, and that became journalism for me, which is something I still do a bit of. But I was just going to say, with my debut, with The Versions of Us, I had a sort of extraordinary explosion of luck and success that I had only dreamt of, and that probably many people in this room might dream of, which was, you know, the novel went to a 7-publisher auction. It sold for like quite a lot of money. It sold in the US for an extraordinary amount. It sold in 24 different countries, 24 translations. It got a TV adaptation option. It went to #1 in the bestseller charts. It was nominated for various things. You know, it was an amazing experience, and one that enabled me to make certain choices about what I was going to do with my time. And in fact, I was, for quite a couple of years, that very rare beast who only earns their living from writing fiction. And that was what I'd only ever wanted. So I remember one very, significant conversation that I had with my agent where I said, well, now I've got this deal, I'm basically going to quit all my journalism and I'm going to stop reviewing theatre, and I just don't need to do any of that anymore because it's all I've ever wanted. And she was like, well, that sounds really exciting, Laura, but just remember this is a long game, and like it's all great now and hopefully it will remain great, but you don't want to burn all your bridges too quickly. And I think in retrospect that I kind of did. I remember actually I had a commission that I was doing for Guardian Weekend magazine when I got the deal. This was in 2014. And it was something I really hadn't wanted to take on. It was interviewing celebrities about their pets. And I was sort of halfway through, and I remember I actually emailed the editor being like, I actually just don't need to do this anymore. I'm giving you back this commission because I've got this deal now and I don't want to do it. Which maybe sounds quite arrogant now, but I think it wasn't really arrogance. It was me just thinking, right, wow, this door has opened and I'm going to own it and I'm going to put everything into it. And financially that was okay for a while, but I would also just say that it was quite difficult, like on a mental health level, actually, to then realise that if you're writing, certainly as I write, I'm maybe doing 3 or 4 hours of work a day and I'm sitting alone in a room, and I hadn't built a community in the way that, you know, the brilliant speaker earlier was talking about, Isabel. So it was a strange way to live. And after a while, I realised that I really desperately wanted to still be engaging with the world and sort of drawing out as well as putting in and getting back into conversations with people, which is what I loved about journalism. So I began teaching, and I now combine writing with teaching. I love teaching. I teach here and in the other places that Ra mentioned. I still do some journalism, but yeah, for me, the primary juggle is between the fiction, the teaching, and now having a 3.5-year-old, which is a whole other discussion. I'll pass it on to Ellie.
Thank you. I'm Ellie, and I published my novel in 2017. Strange Heart Beating, and it was published with Granta, who were my dream publishers. And again, it was a very different situation because it wasn't for a lot of money, and although it was well reviewed, it didn't sell particularly well, but it still felt like my entire world had completely changed. And in fact it had, because when I got the message from my agent that my book had sold, you know, I was cleaning houses for a living and I was waiting for the news to see if anyone would be interested. And when I heard that Granta had made an offer, I just think that my entire world just shifted on its axis at that moment. And I remember standing in the kitchen and just feeling that happen. And even though it didn't change my life financially, it gave me, I mean, I already had some very ill-founded confidence in my writing. I had this sort of bullish feeling that I would just carry on writing until it worked out for me. And so I suppose in that vein, I have carried on writing, and I've had to diversify, as they say, because a literary novel, a slender literary novel, is not the thing that has paid my bills over the years. But I loved writing it so much, and I love writing novels, and that is what I want to continue to do. But I also found myself writing essays and opinion pieces. I was editor of a magazine. I was a sex columnist for a while, which was an extremely fun thing to do. And I also had friends who were screenwriters, and eventually a friend of mine said, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing screenwriting? There's so much money in TV. And I said, well, I don't know how to do it. And he was just like, you just sit down and try. And I did have an idea for a TV show, so I sat down and wrote the script for it. And a production company bought it. It hasn't been made yet, but that's kind of the way it goes in TV. You sell things and don't expect them to get made. The important thing is you just keep writing. And I ended up writing comedy, and that's my main thing now, is that I write for TV. I write a lot of TV comedy. I write for Philomena Kunk. That's my main gig. I've done a few things for Netflix, Death to 2020 and Charlie Brooker's Screen Wipe and stuff like that. And it was just I ended up basically getting 2 agents. So I've got a literary agent and a screenwriting agent, and they both work for me. But they also know each other because they both work at the same agency. So it's all very incestuous and weird. And I also do a bit of teaching. I basically will do anything other than get a real job. So yeah, and I mean, I say that flippantly, but I will continue to write even if it never buys me a house, because this is what I do, and I can't really imagine doing anything else. So that bullishness, I guess, has meant that I have this now portfolio career, a phrase that I've actually never heard before, but I'm sure we're going to say several times now today. So yeah, teaching, essay writing, opinion pieces, I write for TV, and I continue to write fiction, and it all adds up to something extremely satisfying for me, and it is hard work, and I also have just had a baby like Rowan, so so yeah, I'm just quite busy all the time, sitting at my desk and hoping that something good will come of it. I'm going to just pass it on to Rowan. Thanks.
Hello. So my villain origin story is quite similar to the two you've just heard. My first novel came out the same year as Ellie's. I was very, very lucky in that it also went to an auction, and so I got what felt like a huge amount of money to me at the time, because I was 26 or 27, and that was very exciting. And I was still in the formation period of my career at that point. I had been teaching a little bit of secondary school, I'd been doing a bit of tutoring, but I was basically still trying to figure it out and doing any scraps that I could. And so that book became a door for me in a lot of ways, because the thing I've noticed about the writing world, and you guys can agree or disagree, but is that once you're in, and the in doesn't have to be a book, it could be you work in publishing, it could be you do journalism, it could be that you're just even it could be that you work in a bookshop even, but you become part of those conversations and become part of the world. Those doors open two ways. So that led to people asking me to write articles for places like The Atlantic and The Guardian, and I've had things on Granta and the Paris Review because of that book. And, the book was about a Japanese artist who abandons her son, and it's about how and why that happens. It's a novel. I imagined it, though it's sort of a little bit based on family. But because of that, Harper's Bazaar asked me to review the V&A show on kimonos. So these things, they pull together, and it's almost like I think of the book as has gone out in there in the world and brought me back things. And since I've written 2 more books, but I also teach at the moment. I'm teaching for City Lit. I also was teaching for the Faber Academy, but I'm on a mini little mat leave I've given myself, so I've gone down to just teaching that one course. I do some personal one-on-one mentoring, which is something I found has grown a lot. I sort of stumbled into it because I had students who basically asked if I was willing to do it. And it turns out to be one of my absolute favorite things, because it's basically spending some time reading someone's work and then chatting to them for an hour and really getting to know their thought processes and trying to ask them questions that will help them develop their work. It's not telling them what to do. And since then, some of those people have gotten book deals, and that may have had nothing to do with me, but it's been a lovely ride to be on with them. So,
thank you. I think my first question is, how does the other work inform your literary writing, your novel writing, or does it? And you talk about how your books go out there and bring you work, but does that work then inform and kind of develop your writing as well as your literary work?
I think the thing for me that has happened is that all the bits of work that I do, and it sounds awful to say this, but obviously there are times when you just write for money. Sorry, that's blasphemy. But sometimes I'll write opinion pieces because, as you will find out if you venture out into the world, it's quite easy to get an opinion piece published if you are willing to look into your own life and kind of allow readers access into your life. That's something that there's always an appetite for. And I have slightly started to resent having to do that. And so I think that makes me feel so good when I go back to my fiction, because then I'm like, this is my craft. This is something that I'm doing because I really, really want to. And there are moments, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but there are moments where I've written something and thought, I don't know if I would have written it exactly like that had the readership not been what it is currently, which is this sort of appetite for wanting access to a person's life. I will say kind of particularly a woman's life. People want access to it, and they want you to kind of confess things and be raw and honest. And sometimes I don't want to be raw and honest. Sometimes I just want to make things up and be ridiculous. And so I think if it's done anything, it makes me feel like my fiction is a sort of rebellion, and that feels really good because it makes me remember, you know, the origin of that feeling of just wanting to get something down on the page and wanting to let yourself have complete freedom to write anything. So in a way, having the restrictions of the work that I do for money means that I'm more liberated when I get back to my personal craft. Would you say?
So I forgot to mention my other side hustle, which is that I have also edited 2 anthologies. And the reason I'm mentioning it now, one of which was about dogs, so I would have loved to interview your celebrities about their pets. But one of the things that doing that, as well as with the student work, but I think maybe even more the editing, where I'm editing writers who I really love and respect. I've literally reached out to them and said, I want you to be in a book that I have persuaded someone to publish. I think you're brilliant. And then I give them notes and I say things like, hey, can you tell me a bit more about that? Or this bit slow. And I think that helps me take edits, and it helps me see my work clearly and without feeling too personal about it, because I know that when I'm giving those edits, it's not because I want to destroy their work or force it to be in some vision I have for them. It's because I think I see something really exciting that they've got, and I think if they just did these things, then it would come through more. And sometimes they don't do those things, but they do something else that makes it come through, and that's fine. And so it makes me feel less like when I'm being edited that I'm being graded, and more that I'm getting an opportunity. And so I think it just allows me to feel a bit more joyful. I think the other thing about me, for me in fiction, is I get quite, I don't know, anxious sometimes, because I think I had a friend who describes it as selling your soul. It's the best, truest, most real thing you've got. And sometimes I can get into a spiral about but does anyone want that? And so when I spend time with other people's work that I'm confident is great and would be welcomed into the world, it gets me out of that spiral, and I think it helps sort of adjust something in me. And the last thought is I have a friend who writes 2 novels at once, which I can't do. And she calls it having an affair. And when she has her wife novel, and then she has her mistress novel. When she doesn't want to work on her wife novel, she cheats with her mistress. And I can't do that because I can't hold 2 story worlds in my head or 2 whole novels. But having an article or a short story or some editing work that I'm doing on the side when I'm running away from my novel helps me feel like I'm getting away with something. So it's actually a really nice thing.
I think Rowan and Ellie have both put it so articulately. I think just to add, I think for me, it's a kind of lifeline. I mean, in some cases, literally, because the income of an author, even ones who've been very lucky financially at the start, really ebbs and flows and it shifts. But I think for me, the teaching, and then I do quite a bit of journalism, particularly those kind of first-person pieces, which I think we can talk more about in a minute, when a novel's coming out. It's about being in conversation with others about the world and about the work. And I certainly find, maybe it's because I can only write alone in a room, ideally with silence. I'm one of those people. So I do find it quite lonely and quite isolating. I'm not particularly happy on social media. I left social media not long after my second novel was published, which may be why none of the others have sold quite as well, but I don't know. But I don't use it, and I don't feel happy on it. So I'm not. It's very possible, and I also moved from a city, from London, to a field in Kent 3 years ago. So it's very easy to feel quite lonely. And so one of the things I love most about working with students, some of whom are in this room today, it's very nice to see you, hello, is being part of that conversation and feeling like, well, I always feel working with students at any level of their sort of writing career that I'm learning from them, hopefully as much as they're learning from me. Like, I don't know whether this is good to hear or not good to hear, but I think writing doesn't really get any easier, whatever stage you're at. I mean, it's still joyous as well, whatever stage you're at. But however many novels you've written, each novel is itself a puzzle that you have to figure out. And I think spending part of the day figuring out someone else's puzzle is really helpful to me to then come back and try and figure out my own. And also, yeah, just to feel like there's a community. I mean, I also do mentoring like Rowan. I love it. I'm never happier than when I've worked with a writer. This happened recently, and I just look at the book and I say, this is so great, but why don't you start here? And this particular writer went away and rewrote that thing, and then she ended up with this incredible deal. I do not take credit for that. It was a brilliant book in and of itself, but it's wonderful. I don't really do any other editing, but that relationship is really profound and really meaningful. But yeah, the first person pieces thing is maybe a bit of a subgenre, but I have definitely been in the situation with each novel I've written where the marketing or publicity department will sit with you a few months before the novel is published, and they'll say, right, how much of this novel is drawn from your own life, and what are you prepared to talk about and what are you not? And would you like to write a first-person confessional piece about XYZ for whoever? And it's not exactly that they put pressure on you to do that, but there is an understanding that it would be extremely helpful if you could write about that. And I think the dangerous thing about that is sometimes it can lead to a degree of self-censorship at the writing stage. So I would just be mindful of that, particularly writers who are drawing expressly on autobiographical themes. Just be aware that there is this appetite for writers to sort of not exactly defend, but explore those themes in a reasonably frank manner through pieces of journalism. But of course, in the end, it's up to you. Some people are super comfortable with that. I have a former colleague and a friend, Elizabeth Day. She writes beautifully and incredibly candidly about her own life, which I admire so much. I'm not sure it's something I personally could do, but yeah, I think if I offer one piece of advice on that, just decide how far you're willing to go in terms of exploring the substance of your novel on a sort of non-fictional level.
It's very interesting, this discussion about how, the phrase was used earlier of having how large a window over your life you want to have, and how much you want to expose your life, and how when you're going to journalism as a named writer or as an established writer, you're suddenly kind of selling parts of your life. Whilst I guess from a writer's point of view, the writing of the novels is more something you have complete control over. Yeah.
I was just going to say very briefly on that, I had a really funny moment the other day where, the only social media I still use is Facebook. And I was using Facebook Messenger because I'm currently trying to get a rescue dog, which is a separate discussion. And I went into the spam bit of your Facebook messages on Messenger, and I saw in there a message I hadn't seen from, I think it was from 2011, from someone who'd read an article I'd written in The Guardian. And it was the most horrible, vituperative email that she'd written, I think probably while drunk, because it was really rambling, and she really hated me a lot. Oh yeah, you get. And I was like, I haven't even known that was there for the last 11 years or 12 years. This vitriol was sitting there in my inbox, and I didn't know.
Poor woman.
I was
She all that trouble.
I know. I almost wrote back being like, has your hangover worn off yet? Anyway, sorry, that was an aside.
I guess one of the other sort of challenges in this is how do you discipline yourself to keep writing the books that you want to write when you've got all these offers for other work, which obviously pays the bills quicker and in a faster turnaround and more immediately than the novel that you have to spend years over? How do you kind of discipline yourself to not let the other work become your 9 to 5?
I'm a terrible person to answer this question because I've been letting the other work kind of take over the novel writing for a few years now. But my novel is, like you described, it's like my mistress. It's like my dirty little secret. I'll go to my
desk and I'm supposed to be working on several projects at once, and instead I'll be writing my novel and I'll be like, and it's like, I don't really know who I think like this is for, but it feels good to do. My problem is I'm not diagnosed ADHD, but I don't know how to prioritize tasks at all. And as soon as someone asks me to do something, it jumps straight to the top of the queue. And my job at the moment is trying to organise the way that I deal with that. So unfortunately, I work on several things at once. And it's just whatever one happens to be in front of me, it suddenly becomes the most important thing in the world, and I have to do it until someone mentions something else, and then I sweep that off the table and immediately start something else. So I don't really have a good answer to this question, I'm so sorry, other than just keep working. And for me, what happens is I suddenly feel very stressed and uncomfortable with my work situation, and it's because I haven't been focusing on the right things. And it takes me quite a while to understand what's happening, but once I do understand, I will just sit down with my mistress, the novel, and pay her some attention, and I feel very good afterwards, and I feel very calm, and then I can get back to the other jobs that pay the bills. I have such a messy work environment in my head that I just shouldn't be answering this question. I'm so sorry.
It's very reassuring to know that
you can make it work.
You can be extremely successful and be messy, as you said.
You can make it work. There's probably a way of making it a bit easy for yourself, but I haven't worked out what that is yet.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this question as I mentioned, I have a baby, as my pre-baby self. My post-baby self doesn't know how to do this, but I'll figure it out. Probably, I hope. So I think I realized that the thing that was really tripping me up was actually, as I said, I teach, I edit, and I love doing those. But it wasn't that it was eating into my writing time. It was eating into my reading time. So I was only reading work that wasn't finished, even if it was by brilliant, talented people, and then my own work. And that it's actually, for me, really important to read spectacular prose, and that like lights up bits of my brain and helps me remember how to write. And it's not that I'm then being like, I'm now going to become Anne Enright, but something about reading Anne Enright will make me go, oh, wait, words, language, it's exciting. And I think I really had to make myself prioritize that, because there were times, months even, where I was only reading sort of work that was still being formed, and I couldn't understand why my own work, like when I sat down to my own work, it was like dragging, and it felt very heavy, and like there were all these extra words, and I didn't know what was happening. And anyway, turns out, read Anne Enright and everything gets better. But so I think there's that. I think the other thing, I have a reminder on my calendar Tuesday that my partner just saw, that it says, write your novel. And he's like, what novel? You're not working on anything at the moment. You just had, your third one just came out. And I was like, yeah, it's just there. I just put it on repeat every Tuesday to just shout at me to do it. And that seemed to help.
I think the only thing I'd add, and hopefully this might be helpful for everyone in this room, who I'm sure all of you are doing jobs of all different kinds, and trying to fit writing in around it. You don't need to dedicate a lot of time to the fiction writing. I think even on a day when I don't have any other work on, I'm still not writing for more than 3 hours, because I find it exhausting, absolutely exhausting, really draining. And my first novel, The Versions of Us, I wrote while I was still working full-time. I mean, I was freelance, I was working from home, but I was still doing journalism full-time. And I wrote that novel between the hours of 8 and 10, Monday to Friday. So I was just very, very fixed and regular with that time slot. And that's, if you may not have 2 hours at your disposal, even if you only got half an hour, but you have that fixed slot at whatever time of day works for you, maybe you can get 200 words down in half an hour, whatever it is, gradually. Sentence builds on sentence, paragraph builds on paragraph, and that's how a novel gets written. And I think sometimes we can make the mistake of feeling like we have to wait for inspiration to strike, or I often speak to writers, they say, oh, I'm about to take 2 weeks off to go and write. Well, that's lovely, but the best way to get a novel written is to work it into your everyday life, I think, or to have it as a sort of exciting extramarital affair that's going on. But yeah, so for me, it is a juggle, but I just try to think of it as a sort of time management challenge. And I think if there's another caring responsibility, whether it's parenthood or whatever get in your life, that also, I think what I'm trying to say, not very articulately, is that I think I am in fact I have been more productive since having my son than I was before. I've written 3 whole novels since my son was born and gone through a pandemic. He was born in February 2020. So I almost feel like the less time any of us has in a way, the more productive we can be with it if we're focused and we really, really think, as they said in the previous session, about what we want as writers and how we're going to get there.
Thank you. You've
Keep giving you this microphone. You didn't.
You've kind of answered my next question, which was about how to create like some space for yourself mentally to work on the development of books, because there's often the sense that there's a kind of classic idea of poets doing strange other jobs, like Wallace Stevens worked in a bank, and a friend of mine, Gerard Woodward, worked in Manchester University filling vending machines and doing really, really mundane jobs, deliberately so they could free up kind of creative space in their head to think about their work. You've just said the opposite, that juggling and working constantly and having a 3-year-old, etc., kind of actually helps.
Well, I mean, I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish about it. Like it's a tough juggle, as anybody in this room knows. I'm sure it's a very hard environment right now, and there's many pressures on everybody. And I recognise my own privilege in having enough money to put food on the table and have a home, etc. But yeah, I just think it's easy to be hung up on needing vast reserves of time, or imagining that the life of a novelist is one of sort of sitting for hours thinking. The one thing that I do lack right now, definitely post baby as well, is probably thinking time, what I call kind of filling the creative reservoir, because I feel like with teaching, with drawing a novel from you're kind of putting out a lot, but you need time to refill that. And that's one thing I struggle with. I don't know whether you guys manage to. I mean, I used to do things like go to a gallery in the afternoon. I mean, that was a lovely thing to do.
Yeah, trying to have an enriching cultural life, I think, is the most important and yet hardest thing for me currently, because like you were saying, you need time to absorb other people's art and see it not as work, because I think if you're teaching especially and you're also working on several projects at once, everything's unfinished, everything needs work, so everything seems less pleasurable somehow, because you can see all the hoops that it needs to jump through before it's finished. And so to take some time and go to a gallery, I mean, joy. But that is so important. And for me, when I'm working on TV, sometimes I think, what was the last thing I even watched? I don't even know what I'm doing. What was the last thing I even read? Why am I trying to work on something when I'm not currently absorbed by anything? If I'm not reading a novel, what right do I have to be even writing one? So I think taking time and understanding that everything is writing. Absolutely everything you do. If you are a writer, then all your actions are part of your writing craft. And so make sure that those actions are enriching and enlivening and expand the way that you feel about the world, I think. If you possibly can. I mean, I can't. I just sit at home and wipe my baby's face. But, I do occasionally read a book and listen to a piece of music and think, okay, this is it. This is the thing that I'm working towards.
So I hope the advice I'm going to give is actionable for some of you. It might not be actionable. Oh, what a business consultant word. Anyway, I think the thing, as we're apparently talking about having small people in our lives, that I've come to realize is how important it is to have people in your life who respect your writing, and your process for your writing, even if it's not, doesn't look like work, even if it looks like play. Like, for me here right now, it's technically work. But I was so excited. I took a 2.5-hour train ride by myself. I read a book. I did some doodles. It was great. And my baby's with my partner. And that's wonderful. And that gives me just a tiny, tiny bit. So if you have any option right now, and you're looking at someone, you're going, do I want you in my life long term? Think about it. Do they respect your creative play? And if they don't, run away. But equally, like, I have a friend who's a brilliant writer and who's starting her journey as a solo mum. And her mother has said, when that baby's here, I am going to make sure you get time to do creative work sometimes. You know, she doesn't have a traditional partner. It doesn't have to be that. But just if you have anyone in your life who's excited for your play, do ask them, because I think we're in a society that says you shouldn't ask people for help. You should be independent and, like, become rich off your art via some, like, well, also, you know, I don't know, having a Ponzi scheme on Instagram. But you, like, if there are people who want to help you, let them help you. They'll be excited. You can write the acknowledgements. Thank you so much. Acknowledgements are a great time.
Thank you. We've got some time for some questions from the audience. I mean, we could talk all day about this, but yep, we've got a hand up there. Just to repeat the question, yeah. A lot of the examples we've been talking about are writing adjacent, but do you ever have the urge to become something completely different or do completely separate work?
I'll say something briefly and then obviously pass it on. I don't particularly, so I'm sorry to be really boring, but I'm one of those nerds who, like, age 5 told my mum that I wanted to be a novelist, and, like, it's kind of my absolute dream since then. But one thing I would say is that I am completely addicted to novels and stories and poetry that explore the working world that is anything other than writers and artists and people alone in a room, because I just think if you do an interesting or uninteresting job in a very specific area and you could draw on that in your fiction, I think that's amazing, because it's just really hard to find great writers who can write well about the working world. And I think, again, there can be really tough jobs that can be really hard to sort of manage a living around. But I think there's stuff to draw on in whatever you do when you're not at your desk. It's all, like Rowan beautifully said, it's all, and Ellie as well, it's all part of the process. It's all, and when you do end up with an accountant, as I have, amazingly you can basically expense almost everything you do because it is research. Did anyone want to say?
So when I got my book deal, I did carry on doing other jobs, and in fact I have had a job that hasn't involved writing pretty much up until I had my baby, actually. I've always had to, I don't know if I have always had to, actually, but I've always been afraid to not have a job that wasn't writing. So for a long time, I was probably doing, I was waitressing or cleaning or, just, side hustles to pay the bills. And probably because I'm not from money, I was always so scared to rely on my writing. Even though I was making good money, there was always a voice in the back of my head that said, oh, but it won't last, you've got to have something else. You've got to actually, I don't know what it was. It was half based in reality and half just my own psychology. And I've hated all those jobs. They've been awful. So, I don't, but there is a certain romance to having a horrible job that you hate, because I have done a lot of different things. I've seen a lot of different worlds. I've met a lot of different people, and that has all informed my writing practice. And I'm not afraid to do it again. Like, I would 100% do it again tomorrow. And it's not because I think there's, any real romance in good, honest labour. I think it's horrible, but it's been quite good for my writing. So it's not been all bad.
So one of my jobs before my book deal, was being like the lowest, sort of like a paid intern in the marketing department of an architecture firm that made skyscrapers, which is pretty much the opposite of good, honest work. But, you know, I did find myself using tiny bits of that in a writing project later. You know, you do never know what will be useful. And I think in terms of now my life, which is mostly around words, do I want to run away from them? I don't particularly, but I don't think I've talked about this in public. I've actually signed up, starting in September, to train as an art psychotherapist. And for me, that's not completely disconnected. It's because I love the mentoring work. And sometimes I'm really trying to help people with their words, but sometimes they're telling me a lot about their lives. And I get the sense the thing they want from me isn't just the edit on, like, maybe use a different verb. And I wanted to be better prepared to do that. So it wasn't an ending, but I'm excited to see if that changes.
Well, bearing in mind that I am currently sitting in the faculty that employs me, where I teach mainly on the MA, I will answer this question. No, it's a really good question. I don't think any writer needs an MA. I think if you want to teach in a university setting, you probably do. I don't know about teaching in secondary, obviously different sort of set of needs, but it's a really tricky. Maybe we'll talk more after. But I think an MA can be an absolutely transformative and, you know, incredible experience. It is a big financial commitment. I completely recognise that. There are funding sources. You know, you can talk more to the department. There are other courses. Other courses are available, not just MMU. There are also places like Curtis Brown Creative and Faber where you can do courses where you learn an awful lot in a shorter amount of time and maybe they cost less. It's a really hard juggle. If you've done a degree already, I don't know. Does anyone want to comment on that? Do we need an MA? I didn't do an MA in writing, and now I teach writing, so yes, definitely. I would say the darkest moment for me, there have been several. I mean, before getting published, through my 20s, I wrote 3 full novels. I kept sending them to agents, and I would get the feedback that I wrote really well, but then they'd read the rest of the book and tell me it wasn't sellable. We've all, you know, this is a very familiar story. So I was very dejected after book 3 that had gone nowhere. But then I think I just asked myself a really tough set of questions about why I was doing this, because at that time, maybe like a lot of you, I was spending a lot of time sitting alone in a room that I could have been out with friends. And I was in my 20s, that was still a thing that I did, you know. I just asked myself, why does this matter to me so much? Why have I wanted this since I was 5? What can I write that is really like dredged up from somewhere really profound in my soul? And the answer to that became my debut novel, which felt different to me from the beginning. I felt like I was being much more honest and ambitious with it. And when it was written, when I went back to find an agent with it, I felt much more, confident's the wrong word, but I felt sort of at peace with the book. I felt like this is the best thing that I, a broken human in this flawed world, can produce. And if it doesn't sell, hey, I couldn't have done this any better. If the world doesn't want me, then I'll live with that. But I've done the best I can. So that was the first moment. And the second one was between book 3 and 4 or somewhere like that. I got a bit lost along the way, and I submitted a novel to my editor, and I was 8 months pregnant, and he came back and was like, this needs complete page 1 rewrite. And then the pandemic happened, and I had a baby, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever write again. And it was really, really hard to come back to that, put 100,000 words aside, start again from page 1, and rewrite that novel. I'm really glad I did. It became my 4th novel, This Beating Heart, and I'm proud of it. But it was very much a dark night of the soul.
As I've said, I am extremely bullish with my intention to write no matter what. But I do remember when I was writing my debut, sitting and crying in a restaurant with my best friend because I said that I couldn't do it anymore and that I didn't know how to do it. And I'd got so far, and I just felt like it was impossible to finish this book and to make something good of all this work, all this time and effort that I'd put into it. And I guess the thing that got me through that was the fact that I was sitting in a restaurant crying about writing a book. Like, you have to be a very specific person to be doing that. And if you are, then just keep doing it, I think.
So I'm going to start by giving a slightly weird answer, but I'll try to pull something useful out of it, which is very often, almost every other day, I think that. And probably the reason I keep doing it is because I can't actually sleep unless I start telling myself a story, which is a good way, like, for your body to hold you hostage to fiction. So there's that. Not sure that that's advice, but more sort of specifically, I think writing is tricky because it's a conversation. You are writing, or at least I am writing for a reader. I want to communicate something. It's not a diary. But in the same way, like, there's no one reader. There's loads of readers, and they're all going to have different reactions. And I think when my first novel came out, I wasn't fully prepared for that. And I got some really beautiful messages and conversations with people where they said it spoke to them about something happening in their childhood, or, you know, something that happened to their parent, or just people basically tell you their secrets if you write, like, weird, sad books. And that's great. I write weird, sad articles now. People also send me their weird, sad article thoughts. But I also got some people who were like, I don't understand this person. And I think that threw me for a while. I started trying to write, not for all the people who said lovely things to me, but for, like, the one man who came to my reading only to tell me that the books I'd recommended my book to him, and he thought my character should get over it. And I was like, I'll write a book for you, man, I don't even know the name of, that will prove I'm worthy. Oh, no, don't do that. That's really the end of my advice. The end of my advice is don't do that. And that, you know, if you really believe in what you have to say and it's coming from a true place, and I don't mean it is autobiographical. I mean, you're writing about real feelings, you're writing honestly about how you see, like, what being alive is. It will connect with some people and it might not connect with every human being, and that's fine. And don't write for the people who were never going to like you. Write for the people who are excited. Anyway, that's the end of my advice.
Thank you very much. I lied earlier. There wasn't enough time for a last question, so that was the last question. We've gone over time, but the all is lost moment, the darkest moment, is always a good turning point, and always a point of hope and redemption for the future. So it's a perfect point to end this session. So please thank me in joining Laura Barnett, Rowan, and Ellen.